Redditors who knew a murderer before they killed. What were they like? So, a few years ago, I hired a father-son handyman team to help me get my house ready to put on the market. Amongst other things, my outside doorknobs were in bad shape, so they installed new ones. The dad seemed pretty nice, even did a little bit for free. On their third and last day at my house, he was pretty fired up about a big job they were starting the next day. Well, 3 days later, he killed his new clients because they were unhappy with his work. A neighbor saw what happened and ran into her house and hid. He kicked her door in and shot her too. I was terrified until he was caught. Next story. My little sister dated a guy when she was in high school who ended up murdering a couple he owed money to for heroin. The dude beat them with an effing baseball bat and hammer. He almost got the death sentence, but ended up with life in prison with no possibility of parole. He was a seemingly nice, polite teenager. I used to drive him and my sister around for various dates and things. He was quiet, but not oddly so. He just seemed like a normal teenage boy. Next story. I graduated high school with Dr. Death. Chris Dunch. He was an a-hole. He was charming with teachers and people who could benefit him. He was awful to everybody else. I didn't see it, but one or more awkward and vulnerable classmates said he bullied him relentlessly, and I believe it. He was easily irritated, and if you got on his nerves, he would really lose his cool. Remarkably mean, and people would just shrug their shoulders and say that's just how Chris is. Next story. One of my parents' friends used to come around all the time. He was probably only 21, nicest guy ever, type of guy who wouldn't hurt a fly. A couple of years later, he moved and we saw him on the news for murder. Turned out he got on the ice and his girlfriend convinced him to kill her ex with her. They then buried him in concrete. Only reason they got caught was because they wrote their effing names in the concrete. Next story. A boy a couple of years my minor in high school, he was always the outcast in his classes. He dressed funny, talked funny, and said disturbing things that some recall as threats, mostly to the girls of the school. After graduation, he ended up butchering a homeless woman he was, I can't say living together or in a relationship with, but I'm not sure what their status was. Either way, kitchen knife, drained her into the tub. In court, he showed no remorse and was proud to have finally ended someone's life, he said. His father was my professor in university. He took it very hard. Next story. Yes, was hired at the same time as him. Worked right next to him for several years. He was one of those stoner guys always bragging about the parties he went to. He was a little obnoxious in a bro sort of way, so I always skipped hanging out with him after work. Well, after I left that job a little while later, he killed his ex-girlfriend while his 5-year-old was in the apartment watching TV, took the kid on a road trip to Texas, and smothered her on Christmas morning, and left her in a suitcase on the side of the road. Next story. I spent 3 months on a study abroad with a Special Forces ex-FBI guy named Joe. We were a small group of mostly students, whereas Joe was older, and there as a part of foreign immersion training for the military. He was a little odd and awkward at times and didn't share too much about himself, which we mostly attributed to the age difference. I'd describe Joe as very intense but kind-hearted. The military was very important to him, and he always seemed very focused on that, but occasionally he'd make a dry joke or let his guard down for a moment with the group. He was very into photography and shared lots of great photos for the trip. He was also somewhat the protector of the group, and we always felt completely safe with him. One story I'll share was when he was walking over a bridge and spied some guys in the trees waiting to jump down and rob him. He pulled out a large knife he carried on him and casually brandished it as he walked by. The guys smartly decided not to mess with Joe, but after he crossed, he saw them sprint across the bridge and hide behind a building. 2 policemen showed up shortly after, and Joe showed them where the guys were hiding so the police could arrest them. Anyways, a few years after we got back, I heard the news that he had killed someone and took his own life. He had been training for a new position and his commander deemed that he wasn't physically fit enough for the job. The judgment effectively ended his career and he felt he had been unfairly judged. He brought a gun into the base and shot his commander dead, then took his own life. Next story. In my first semester of college, I had a computer science professor I really loved. Near the end of the semester, he told us he may be taking time off and finding a replacement for the semester. His severely autistic son had died in a tragic pool accident. He noted that the media was trying to make him look bad. I created a GoFundMe for funeral expenses. He appreciated it and shared photos to use on the page. Fast forward half a year, I get calls from news reporters asking what my thoughts are. He had been arrested on suspected unintentional manslaughter. It turns out he had left his son outside in the cold by the pool unsupervised when he left for work. His son was never supposed to be unattended. His son was outside for who knows how long before the professor's daughter found the boy face down in the pool. Further research into the case revealed the boy was living in an unfurnished basement, feces all over the walls, often left alone. The police were at the home frequently. CPS had made various safety requirements for them that they never followed. He's been charged with unintentional manslaughter and various forms of child abuse. Him and his wife are also being charged for filling the boy's Ritalin prescription for many months after the death. I still believe it was intentional. Text messages revealed the daughter discovered the boy when the professor texted her asking her to check if freak was okay. Edit. Some people here did their research. I learned a lot more about the case. Any doubts I had have been dissolved. I'm confident this was not just some big, sad accident. When it first happened, he told classes that one particular media outlet was trying to portray it as more than an accident. He told us directly how upset he was about that and really emphasized how important it was that it was nothing more than an accident. I didn't think much of it. Of course, you wouldn't want people blaming you for your son's death. Looking back, it should have raised some red flags. But it's just crazy because he was so nice. He motivated me to stick to computer science. He seemed so appreciative of the GoFundMe. He was very highly rated. It's crazy. Next story. The younger brother of a girl I was friends with in middle school and high school. They had some struggles growing up, and I know their mother was an abusive relationship because we gave her some help getting away from her husband. We connected many years later and found out that the younger brother had murdered someone. Initially, it sounded pretty gruesome, but when I actually read court reports, I kind of felt bad for the kid. He had some mental illness issues, but as a teenager, apparently he had been groomed by a much older man into a sexual relationship where the man provided money, shelter, and of course drugs. He was extremely controlling and abusive. Eventually, the kid tried to get away and was trying to start a new life with a girl he met, but this guy tracked him down and blackmailed him. Eventually, the kid snapped and murdered him. I think I felt worse for the kid because a lot of people can't get away from their abusers. Edit. For those who asked, he was a 16-year-old runaway with a history of drug problems when he started seeing the more than 20 years older guy who used to film him. He struggled with drugs but was doing well, and he met with the man to tell him he loved someone else and he wasn't going to see him again. His story is that the guy attacked him saying he'd rather he died than break up. He had injuries consistent with fending off a knife attack and said he killed the man in self-defense. But what probably really screwed him over is that he did not call the cops. He hid the body instead. And despite all of the evidence pointing to him being preyed on, he got a sentence that is longer than the average human lifespan. He committed the crime in a place where being gay or bisexual isn't really acceptable. A lot of stories in the news refer to him as a hustler and say that he killed one of his patrons. Next story. One of my best friends when I was stationed at Fort Bragg ended up getting into some sort of drunken altercation later on in his career at Fort Hood. Went back to his house to retrieve a pistol, went back to the party, and shot a dude. It was absolutely insane to me when I heard about it because he had never shown any tendencies towards violence when I hung out with him pretty much every day for over 2 years. Probably drank a little too much, but he was always just a good dude raising a good family. Last time I spoke to him was 3 days before his trial. He ended up changing his plea to guilty to receive 25 years instead of life. He's at Leavenworth now, going on probably 7 or 8 years now. I feel bad for the family of the guy he shot. He was a medically retired vet and didn't deserve to be gunned down like that. As much as the murderer was my friend, he gets to go home one day. The guy he shot never will. Okay, so I would like to say something. I don't know what it is, but I think something is in the water at Fort Bragg because I had 2 buddies there. One of them was the dumbest guy I've ever met. The other guy punched his 3rd fiance in the wife of a gas station parking lot and then got dishonorably discharged. Something is going on at Fort Bragg. I'm gonna go investigate. Anyway, next story. So, kid was in my dad's Weeblue troop and hung out with my brother. Really arrogant and mouthy. Biggest thing he did in junior high was when he was in 7th grade, he dismantled the toilets in one of our school's upstairs bathrooms. Then, a couple of years later, his mom passed away, and he found her. Started to get in trouble, theft, then fighting. A few years later, he SA'd a girl, went to jail. After he was released, he wound up killing 7 people. Then my neighbor's father murdered his entire family and then unalived himself shortly before he was to be indicted over a Ponzi scheme thing. I knew the whole family well. The dad was always a little weird and would do things like wear a full 3-piece suit to a child's soccer game. Never showed any signs of violent behavior though. The mother and 2 daughters were wonderful people. It was a real tragedy. Next story. My family bought a house from a man who flipped houses for a living back when I was growing up. He was a nice man, married with grown kids. He would often come over for dinner and help with minor repairs around the house. We moved away a few years later, and he wanted to buy the house back. Luckily, it was a cash deal because soon after it all went through, he was arrested for child adult content. When the cops raided his house, there was no sign of his wife. Upon looking into it, no one had seen or heard from her in months. It turns out he had murdered her and buried her in their backyard. I sat next to that man at the dinner table as a child. Still haunts me. Next story. I played basketball with a guy a few years ago in high school. Tried to find him on Facebook and turns out he was being tried for murder. Apparently, he and some of his friends were looking for pot money, so they broke into this guy's house and somehow the guy ended up dead. Everyone in the group said he pulled the trigger, but he denied it. Maybe he did it, maybe he didn't, but I can say that he was a genuinely nice person when I knew him. Never would have expected him to kill someone, but I guess my mom was right about hanging out with the wrong crowd. Next story. My best friend's older brother killed her stepmom, strangled her, and burned the house down. He was just like any other teenage older brother, a bit rebellious, but nothing out of the ordinary. He was kinda goth and liked heavy metal and had dark humor. He played GoldenEye with us and let me use the see-through purple controller. He teased his little sister just like any brother would. One time, he took us for a car ride and did donuts in a church parking lot while blasting a big Shiny Tunes album, and it was really fun. Nothing ever indicated that he would do that later in life. Next story. One of my childhood friends had a creepy little brother. She told me he killed some kittens in their driveway with a basketball, and that one night he woke her up by standing over her bed with a lighter, watching her. He was only like 6 or 7 years old. A couple of years later, I find out from her that he's been institutionalized until he's 18. She told me she was really worried for herself and her parents the day he gets out, which, now that I think about it, may have happened already, or it's coming soon. Edit. As for how I remember him, he wasn't like my little brothers, as in he didn't get excited about games or toys, and he never smiled. Next story. My manager at work was a pretty chill, nerdy guy. He was really nice to talk to and a fun boss. Then he smothered his infant son, and it kind of messed me up for a while. This was a guy that I almost considered a friend. Everyone at work was shocked and didn't know how to handle or feel about it. Of course, we talked about it when there weren't any customers around, but most of it was the expected, "I can't believe manager did this" talk. Next story. He was a seemingly really nice dude. He worked in our college dining hall, always friendly, polite, kind to the students, and he made me smile or chuckle more than once. But it turns out he stabbed a homeless woman over 24 times and was arrested for murder. I suppose some people can just snap or are really good at hiding their true nature. Not sure which category he falls into. Next story. Never knew this guy personally, but in my hometown, there were 4 kids in particular. 2 of them being the victim, believe it or not. We'll call them Eric and Matt, who I did know personally, and then the only survivor of the attack, Howard. The killer, who we can call Jake, was celebrating his friend Matt's 21st birthday with Eric and Howard. Everything seemed okay at first, but as the night went on, Jake seemed quiet and sort of detached, which is about the time Matt and Howard went to go chat with them and check on him. Soon after, Eric noticed he was getting a bit fidgety and walked over as well. As he walked over, Jake had pulled a knife and stabbed Matt in the throat. Howard, having seen this, immediately turned to run while Eric tried to stop Jake. Jake was then able to stab him several times until he died. Howard was able to get away with severe injuries, but luckily lived to tell the tale. Jake turned himself in not too long afterwards. Everyone who knew him wasn't surprised that he did it. I guess he always seemed a bit wacko. Next story. A girl that lived with us for a while had a boyfriend that would stop by and visit the go-out. He loved his meth, according to her. They moved in together. He beat a man to death with a baseball bat over some drugs. She helped him hide the body. He testified that she knew nothing about it so that she could stay out of jail to raise the kids. So, in some ways, that's kind of romantic, but also concerning that there's somebody who assisted with hiding a body still out in the world raising children, the next future generation of criminals. Well, that's something to think about. But anyway, next story. So, I went to high school with a kid who was the awkward kid. He tried to fit in, but he tried too hard. He was physically inept, overweight, tried to fit in by being goth or punk, but it wasn't quite right. Bad haircut, no fashion sense, just an odd duck. And the misery on him was palpable because of the crappy way people treated him. I felt sorry for him. That is, until after high school. He was working alone at his parents' children's clothing store when a woman and her daughter came in. He locked them in, SA'd the woman, and then murdered her and her 19-month-old baby. He was caught. caught, tried, and convicted to 2 consecutive life sentences without parole, and as far as I know, is still serving those sentences. Next story. I went spelunking with the girl who shot people at Penn State. We worked at the diner together. Her husband was the maitre d', and she was the cashier. I was a server. He was nice. She was nice. She was apparently booted from the army for not taking her meds. Then she worked at the diner. Seemed fine. Then stopped taking her meds. I never would have thought it or expected it. They were both a bit weird, but we all were. About a month or so after our spelunking trip, she went to an old main lawn, hid in some bushes, and just started sniping people. Some guy stopped her and got stabbed trying to do so. Never would have thought her capable of that. Rest in peace to the people that she killed. Sorry for the people she injured. Weird time. Haven't thought of that in a while. Next story. I was school friends in high school with a guy who ended up murdering his ex-girlfriend and her 2 friends on the side of a highway. One survived. He drove them off the road and executed them before taking his own life. The guy was an active member in the Mormon church. He went to the activities like dances, camping trips, seminars, scouts, etc., but he was always a little bit rebellious. He was aggressive and very much tried to be the alpha. He was a very good football player and was very athletic. If he was your partner in gym class, he would hit you. Not full power, if you ever made a mistake though. He used to talk about chasing cats down in his truck if he saw them on the road and would laugh about it later. He also was an avid hunter and enjoyed killing things, which isn't that uncommon in Alberta since everyone had a family member who lived on a farm and shot gophers or pests at some point. We all thought he was just aggressive because of hormones. Dude was jacked and had the voice of a 30-year-old at 17, but we never expected him to turn out the way he did. P.S. I never really met his parents, so I don't know if he had issues at home, but his sisters were a year or 2 older than me, and they are lovely people. They were always kind and caring and would go out of their way to make sure nobody was left out. Next story. It's not my personal story, but it's my dad's. He used to be a special ed teacher/assistant, and he met all kinds of kids when he first started teaching. Well, one occasion he used to always talk about was one kid in his class that was extremely antisocial and never said a word during class. Screwed up part is that they put this kid in special ed with kids that have disabilities when this certain student didn't have any. My dad ended up getting to know this kid, and he was very shy and said short sentences, but my dad realized he was very intelligent and reached out to him about high placement. The principal declined the request and the kid went back into his shell. One day on the news, all I see is a murder at the high school my dad worked at, and it turns out that the kid went to school with a loaded handgun on a mission to kill the principal. Cops swarmed the school and SWAT came in to detain the student. SWAT ended up putting 17 bullets into the kid. Later, my dad found his notebook, and it turns out the kid had a dream to be a teacher like my father and help others with depression and neglect. Next story. Yeah, a kid who was in my friend group back in the 80s. He was the weird one. A girlfriend of mine dated him and said he was the weirdest kisser ever. Like a tiny little weasel tongue darting around in her mouth. Anyway, when we were all about 19 and out of high school, my boyfriend and I were watching the news, and there's Frank. He'd grown his hair out and dyed it blonde, all Vince Neil-like, and apparently slit his girlfriend's throat from ear to ear and was now on the run and using another friend's name as an alias. He got caught and sentenced to a whole bunch of years in prison. But there's more. I ran into him after he got out. I didn't recognize him. It was maybe '06, and a massive buff dude in a convenience store called my name. He had to tell me who he was, and I spoke to him for a while. One of the first things he did was rattle off the childhood phone numbers of myself and about a half dozen of our friends in our friends group. So he'd remembered all of those numbers for like 20 plus years, and that was the first thing he thought to tell me about. He was driving a red Corvette too. He proudly revved it up, told me how he made the money pimpin', and told me that if I was a good girl, maybe I'd get to ride in it someday. And I kept running into him coincidentally. A car would pull up next to me, and it would be him. He showed up at my house driving one of those meat trucks with the coolers, like Omaha Steaks or something, trying to sell me steaks. He asked if I needed a roommate. He assured me his killin' days were over. He was very scarily intelligent and quite funny. He told me also about getting into an altercation with his vegan neighbors, going back into his house, returning with a head of cabbage, and chucking it at the dude. I really don't think the constantly running into him was a coincidence, though, and I was kinda disturbed by it. Oddly, I just received a random Facebook message from him asking if I knew anyone who wanted to buy a new fan. We aren't Facebook friends or anything. Anyway, yeah, Odd dude. Okay, OP, at least by the way that she's describing it, seems a little too nonchalant about just casually running into a killer over and over again, who she has admitted is not really a coincidence. So I don't know. I would be a little bit more alarmed. That's just me. Maybe you're different. Maybe she is. But anyway, next story. So, my childhood neighbor and Sunday school teacher, children's church classes, recently murdered his wife in cold blood. He is like 70 years old. He always gave me the creeps and I could never figure out why. Once, when my brother was around 15, he was over at their house with our mom helping this man's wife do some renovations on their house. The guy showed up and went off on my brother as if he were trying to get with his wife, when my brother was forced to be there by our mom to help this older lady. Odd. Then, fast forward to now, my dad works at the jail that he's at. My parents were divorced, so my dad never knew him before. An elderly lady, by the way, recently visited the killer in jail and had a health emergency while she was in the visiting cubicles, and my dad called the ambulance to help her or whatever. Later on, this guy shakes my dad's hand and looks him right into his eyes with a seemingly genuine thank you for saving this lady. And my dad said he felt a chill run through his entire body and compared the guy's smile to the cat from Alice in Wonderland. Creepy. Next story. So, I made coffee for Bob minutes after I met him. Seemed like an okay person, young and carefree, quite looking forward to an eventing of beer and barbecue steak with his dad. Well, he and a friend Frank were on their way to Bob's dad's house to celebrate the dad's birthday, followed by fishing the next day. Late in the evening, Frank decided he'd had enough beer and went to sleep. Well, a couple of hours later, Bob shook him awake saying, "I done it. I killed him. I done him with the axe." Sure enough, Bob had embedded an axe into his dad's head. Frank wanted to go, but Bob was still hyper and a bit manic, so he had to wait until Bob finally dozed off near dawn. Then he walked like 10 kilometers to town and told the cops what had happened. Frank was then arrested on the spot for being an accessory to murder because he hadn't immediately leapt into Bob's car without the keys and tried to drive away. The cops found Bob still sleeping and his dad still dead. Bob went to jail, but I forgot how long for. It was a long time ago, and he's probably out now. The cops dropped the charges against Frank, though. Next story. My ex-boyfriend's best friend in school ended up breaking into his girlfriend's house with another guy and beat her to death. I remember hanging out with him in 2 classes that my ex didn't have with us. He was really funny and a smartass. He got me in trouble a lot for laughing during class. He was also good at drawing and coming up with raps. When I read the article about him years later, though, I was kind of shocked. But I guess people just change. Next story. When I was 10, I had a friend from the next block over who had an older brother of 16 or 17. One night, his brother had a fight with his mom over a bad report card from school, and it escalated to him chasing his mom out of the house and shooting her with a rifle. I had met both his mom and his older brother, but in the way that 10-year-olds meet parents and much older brothers, just passing through on our way to play or go ride bikes. His brother just seemed like a brooding teenager that, in retrospect, smoked a lot of pot and had anger issues. Really didn't want to have anything to do with us because we were lame. For some reason, I think Sid from Toy Story with a cowboy hat. And no, I did not hear the shot or the ensuing police stuff, even though it happened maybe 50 yards away from my house. Brother ran, they caught him quickly, house went for sale the next week, and I never saw my friend again. Never found out his verdict or sentence. I was 10 years old. Next story. My aunt was a surgical technician who worked closely with Michael Swengo, the killer doctor at Ohio's state hospital. She said he had very poor bedside manner and didn't seem even slightly concerned when his patients were in pain. He would often bring in food for the other staff and people would mysteriously get sick after. He eventually got exposed after the roommate of one of his patients/victims heard him inject a lethal dose of medication into her IV and told the woman, "When it gets your other arm, you'll be dead." By the time he was found out, he had already fled the state, though. My aunt and several of her co-workers were interviewed by what they were told was the state medical board, but it was actually the OSU board of directors. There was a large cover-up from the university to protect their university, and Swengo was allowed to kill over 100 more patients before he was caught. There's a really good book about Swengo and the cover-up called Blind Eye. My aunt was interviewed for the book and said it's the most accurate description of the killings and the politics that allowed him to keep killing. Next story. When I started out as a painter's helper, I worked for a painter who was the most mellow guy I've ever met. I effed up buffing a Viper bumper and burned it, and he said, "No sweat, it happens." Then a couple of weeks later, I scratched Tex Earnhardt's grandson's truck after I finished buffing it up, pulling it into detail. But again, no sweat, stuff happens. I eventually, though, left to be a painter at another shop, and about 6 years later, the shop manager from that shop got hired on at the new shop. We got to talking, and a few months after I left, that painter went home one day and killed his wife as she walked in the door. Shot her from upstairs, then walked up and shot her a few more times point blank. He's in jail right now. I never would have guessed he had a temper at all. If things went south in the shop, he always just shrugged it off and said, no sweat. It sucks too, because he really taught me a lot in the short time I was there. Next story. I was friends with a kid in elementary school, and I would go over to his house to play Legos, etc. We sort of ended up in different groups by middle school and were just acquaintances in high school. He was a pretty normal kid and went to parties, graduated with a good GPA, etc. His parents were middle class and owned a home, etc. He ended up bashing his roommate's head in with a bat in 2016, though. The roommate had a dog, and it was on its period. It was making a mess all around the house, and he wouldn't clean it up. The roommate also neglected the dog, and I guess my old Lego buddy had had enough. The guy was sleeping on the couch, and he just went to town on his head with the bat. The eyewitness ran out of the house thinking he was next, and said all he remembers is the guy's face was pretty much gone, and only heard gurgling sounds as he fled. Crazy world. Next story. I once spent some time with some rough guys growing up who ran a gang, if you want to call it that. They sold most of the drugs in our town. I spent my time with that group of people because they accepted you no matter who you were. Our initiation to get into the group was to beat the crap out of each other in the front yard of their house. It was considered a sign of respect to each other. Anyways, one time we were at a party and these two dudes invited this guy to come up to the hills with them. This party was out in the sticks, middle of nowhere, and I remember while I was there, seeing one of them grab a baseball bat before they got into their truck and left with the guy. I left the party a little bit later, but I heard from some other people in the group that when they came back, it was just the two dudes and that their baseball bat had blood on it. I never saw the guy they took up there again. I don't know what they did to him, and it could be that he wasn't even from our town, that maybe nothing happened to him and the people who told me about it were seeing things. But I stopped hanging out with those guys shortly after that. Next story. My cousin's husband was a murderer. When he was younger, he beat this guy to death with his bare hands and ended up getting away with it for self-defense. Years later, he marries my cousin and her life completely changed. She was so beautiful and funny and amazing, and now here was this beautiful woman only allowed to wear baggy shirts and baggy pants or shorts. She dressed like a tomboy. She was out looking for him always in the bars, and when she finally left him, we were all so happy. She then got a new hot boyfriend, and it was a good time. Then her ex got all yipped up on drugs, broke into her house while she and her boyfriend and her kids were all sleeping, and shot them in the head and her in the chest. The boyfriend survived, but she didn't. My cousins were in the house and they heard everything. The saddest part is my cousin's son was shot not too long ago and paralyzed. Instead of my cousin telling the police who did it, he took it into his own hands and started going around shooting people he thought was the one who shot him. He ended up killing an innocent kid. He was an innocent kid himself before all of this. Now he's in prison with the stepdad that killed his mother. Next story. Worked with a guy for a while who was super nice and funny. Never seen him lose his temper or even talk crap. He used to say Derrick Rose, the NBA player, was his cousin, which I always thought was bull crap, but I digress. Anyways, he ended up getting into an argument with his kid's mom, picks up his little daughter, I think she was only like 3, and starts slamming her into the sidewalk until she was dead. When the cops showed up, he ran into his house and tried to burn it down while hiding in the basement. The cops ended up taking him alive, unfortunately. Next story. My mother killed my little brother. She always had a screw loose, would beat me, abused her bipolar meds, and had distanced herself from the family, and had been in and out of jail. Then one day she snapped and suffocated my 1-year-old Down syndrome brother to death because he was crying too hard. Never forgave her and never will. I have no intention to ever see her again. Next story. Not myself, but my friends used to hang out with the Boston Marathon bomber at UMass Dartmouth. They said they never saw it coming. He was a regular dude, smoked weed and drank with a lot of the people I smoked weed and drank with. On a related note, I grew up near the campus in Dartmouth. He was testing bombs in the same woods my friends and I used for airsoft, drugs, and alcohol. I'm pretty sure I heard one once. I live a mile from a range, so I occasionally hear gunshots from there during the day. But one day, I heard a single extremely loud blast that didn't sound like any gunshot I've ever heard. Our town has a popular Facebook page, and a lot of people were asking about it on there, asking if there was a crash. It's our favorite thing to do on there besides complain about the town trash bags, but nobody could find a crash report or pictures, so that was the end of it. A rare phenomenon for a town full of nosy townies. And the very next week, the marathon bombing occurs. Then weeks later, reports from the police come out about his bomb tests being done in those woods. And I'm wondering to myself, how is this guy testing bombs in those woods and nobody's hearing? Oh, wait. But yeah, the TLDR, marijuana makes boy into killer. Next story. When I was around 10, I hung out with this kid and his brothers sometimes when my mom needed their mom to babysit me. He was the sweetest guy and we had a lot of fun hanging out and playing dumb little kid games. But soon I was able to stay home alone when my mom had to work, so I didn't see him and his brothers for a few years. One day, a friend called my mom to catch up and asked, "Did you hear what happened to X?" We had no contact with this family in those years, so we had no idea what had happened. Apparently, this kid's mom had moved in with a shady boyfriend who made a habit of keeping loaded weapons around the trailer. One day, my friend was having an argument with two of his brothers, found the gun, shot his 5-year-old brother in the head, his 17-year-old brother in the leg, and after realizing what he had done, turned it on himself. I'll never understand what was going through his head. He was 13. Next story. Friend of my cousin's, he would sometimes come up for visits with him to do some work around the house for my parents. Didn't have a license or a car to drive himself. He was pretty quiet and kept to himself. There was a language barrier, but did decent work, so my parents kept paying him to come back as needed. Well, apparently he violently murdered his girlfriend, stabbed her multiple times. He tried to use my cousin, who was out of the country at the time, as an alibi in an attempt to get out of the charges. Nope, not gonna work, dude. Next story. This isn't exactly what you're looking for, so apologies in advance, but it's a chilling story that I feel like sort of fits. Now, I grew up with a girl I'll call Mindy. She and I were never close, but we were in school together from kindergarten through 12th grade, so we were sort of friends. Our class mostly was all together that whole time, so we all knew each other well. Then, a year or two after high school, Mindy started dating a guy I'll call Jake. No one I knew him or anything about him, but they seemed happy enough. Then, after about a year of dating, they got engaged around Christmas time. That seemed a little too soon for most of us since she was only like 19, but I hadn't kept in touch with her much, and so I didn't think much of it. Then in June, about 6 months after the engagement, Jake and Mindy were drinking one night. They got into an argument, and he shot her in the face and killed her. Then all of us learned about him. He had shot at his ex-girlfriend too and hit her car as she drove away, but she escaped unharmed. And Mindy had gone to court with him when he had to appear for those instances. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near alcohol or weapons. He had over a dozen arrests for things like drunk driving and domestic violence. Jake should have been in prison long before he ever met Mindy. One of the saddest things was that after it all happened, I went to look at his social media. He had lots of pictures of him and Mindy, and one of them, another girl who we had grown up with, who I'll call Sarah, and who was closer with Mindy, had commented a few months prior, and her exchange with Jake was something like this. Sarah said, "Has Mindy been with you all weekend? She's ignoring my calls." Then Jake says, "Yeah, she's with me, but I'll make her call you back, LOL. "Good, you better not steal her away from me." "Oh, you know I'd never take her away from you." "Okay, good. She just texted me now. Thanks." And guys, mind you, that was, like I said, months before Mindy's death. But the fact that he had literally said, "I'd never take her away from you," and then he did this, it's just so sad and scary. Next story. So a kid several years older than me in the neighborhood always used to invite me to play tackle football with the older kids. I was probably 8 and they were in their early teens. He was a huge kid, and occasionally he'd hand it off to me, then pick me up like a battering ram and run with me. I thought he was the coolest and nicest guy. Well, a little while later, I saw him on the news for dropping a cinder block off a bridge into traffic. He killed a soldier home on leave. Really tragic. It never made any sense to me. Next story. Not gonna lie, I'm pretty sure my brother is either a murderer or is on the cusp of becoming one. All the signs are there: torturing animals, wild mood swings, disregard for morality, mental illness, and he always solves issues with aggression. The worst part is he gets off on being like that. Call it power drunk or whatever, but it's scary. He put me in the hospital twice, and one of those times I would have been strangled to death if I hadn't stabbed him in the side. Plus, he has an insatiable need for drugs, and most recently, it's been meth. He's currently voluntarily homeless in California, and last time he did that, he frantically called my dad asking for a bus ticket home because people were after him and his safety was threatened. This happened to be around the time that the homeless camp he was a part of had reported some missing people and deaths. For reference, he started the animal torture and enjoyed it from around the age of 7 or so, until well into his teenage years. Then drugs were his preference of euphoria. Next story. I know too, believe it or not, I helped build a house for a local bartender that was also a major coke dealer. He married a local girl, moved out of state, and ended up murdering his wife. When I knew him, he was mostly a jerk, angryish and paranoid. The other one was a guy I went to high school with, married the daughter of a local doctor, moved to another state and became a successful lawyer and eventually a corrupt judge. The lovely wife discovered the corruption and confronted the judge. He hired a hitman and had her murdered in front of her kids. In high school, he was an oafish, conceited narcissist, a real braggart and a bully. Both got life without parole. Next story. I lived next door to a woman with 3 kids. We didn't see her much, but saw her kids playing outside all the time. One Sunday morning, we were awakened by the sound of news helicopters hovering over the house. It wasn't too unusual to hear helicopters, as we were not too far from a secondary airport, which was also a National Guard base. Well, we go outside and see most of the neighborhood out in the street and crime scene tape around the house next door. Apparently, the woman was a single mom, divorced from a guy from Iran who was threatening to take the kids back to Iran with them. Well, she drugged her kids, brought them all into her bedroom, and while they slept, she set the house on fire. It didn't burn much as the doors and windows were closed, so it was mostly smoke, but enough to kill her and all of her kids. I feel real bad that we never really knew her, but heard from a neighbor that she suffered from depression and did not want to make friends. Her parents, who tried to sell the house since they had loaned her the money for the house, and when they couldn't sell the house, they moved into it. Imagine living in the house where your daughter and grandkids died. Next story. In high school, I knew a guy a year older than me who was one of those weird, twitchy kids who drove a panel van. He used to tell all these ridiculous stories that were so absurd that nobody would ever believe them. But he was one of those weird kids who was outgoing and chatty. My girlfriend was good friends with him up through middle school before I knew him, so she would chat with him occasionally, and he always weirded me out, but he seemed harmless. I had at least a foot and 80 pounds on the guy. He said he and his weird, gothish girlfriend used to drive around in the van and pick up women, blindfold them, and then have super rough sex in the van and then drop them off. Now, you'd definitely go, dude, that's effing SA, not funny. But back then, it was like, okay, dude, sure, go away, whatever. Well, the guy graduates, joins the army, and then gets sent to North Carolina or something like that. My girlfriend calls me sobbing one night because she was his call from jail. Turns out, one of the guys in his barracks wanted to get rid of his wife, so he asks the dude from my high school to kill her for $15,000. High school dude accepts, and one night he hides in some bushes in their neighborhood, and when she walked by at night, jumped out from the bushes and stabbed her a bunch. Apparently, he regretted his decision because he turned himself in a day later or so and went to prison. So, do you guys remember earlier when I said there's something going on in Fort Bragg? Well, Fort Bragg is in North Carolina. Where did the killer in this story go to in the army? North Carolina. He probably went to Fort Bragg. Something's going on there. Anyway, next story. So, I met a guy in the army. He was skinny, awkward, and very slow mentally. Literally, he failed the theory test as he simply couldn't write fast enough. But he knew the answers. He was a perfect soldier, didn't question anything, but he was stuck with us, all students in the army through the university. And we are a bit more critical. Well, we've been with him for a month or so, and guys tended to poke fun at him, until we realized it might be better we don't, and we made jokes about him killing us when we'd be out in the firing range. I know that at one point, he almost hit a dog while driving his car. He didn't even try to brake because it'd be the dog's fault if it didn't get out of the way, he said. When asked how he'd react if it was a baby, he said it'd be the same way. Oh, and he ate pizza by lifting it whole and biting into it. I mean, if that isn't a red flag, what is? But 5 or so years later after we've met him, he shot a policeman, father of 3, square in between the eyes while being stopped on a routine check. It was a really big deal, as we aren't used to that where I'm from. He was found to have severe mental issues and was locked up for maximum time in a psychiatric ward, which is mere 5 years. Next story. Had a friend I used to spend time with at his house. His older brother was a bit of a weirdo, but never more than your ordinary weirdo. We were children, my friends and I in 5th, 6th grade. He was 2 to 3 years older than us, and when we went over to their house, he spent his time on the computer playing games most of the time. He would even open up adult content and make us watch it with them. A couple of years ago, he was 28, he murdered his mom, stabbed her multiple times. His mom was the secretary to Illinois Representative Dan Lipinski. When I heard about it, I was just shocked. Considering you hear about people killing people all the time, and even people killing family members, but never expect to know/meet someone that will do it. Next story. I moved from California to Salina, Kansas in 1984 because my dad's mom was sick with cancer. I met a few people in 8th grade that murdered one or more people. The first is Alan Eugene White. He was featured on America's Most Wanted in, I believe, 1996. He murdered a grandmother, her daughter, and the daughter's 5-year-old son with a hammer while they were tied up. Then he had a Coke while he pondered what to do next. Then the next guy I was friends with was Andrew Juan Anthony. He murdered his girlfriend at the time, grandfather at the motel he worked at, Juan or Quan as he called himself, and 2 others stabbed and bludgeoned the old man to death when he wouldn't open the safe. This was 1992. Early that year, he was arrested for shipping steroids across the border of Mexico, and due to that was kicked off that old show American Gladiator. They had huge roided guys on there, but they never got caught for roids, so… And Quan was featured with his girlfriend on A Current Affair, with his being shown as a Svengali, thus giving Quan the fame he was seeking all along since 8th grade. I knew the 2 other guys in town. One guy, Sheldon, don't remember last name, along with 2 other guys tied up a 70-year-old guy looking for drug money, and the man asphyxiated from the duct tape over his face. Then another guy I was friends with, James, was smoking crack behind Benton's, the only black bar in Salina, with a 5-foot-tall white guy by the name of Rocky. Well, Rocky was hassled a lot elsewhere, but accepted at Benton's bar. He dropped the crack pipe and was kicked so many times in the head by James, he died of his injuries. I'd say that town was kinda weird to live in. On one hand, back then I don't remember locking doors till nighttime. On the other hand, it's crazy to think back I knew that many murderers in a small town under 50K population. Next story. I was in high school with a kid who was charged with murder and sentenced to life in prison while we were still students. He and a friend carjacked a lady and ended up shooting her. She and her unborn baby died. It was a shock though because nothing like that happened in our town. The guy in question wasn't a real friend, but we were friendly. We rode the school bus together and chatted a lot, and he was a friendly face in the halls. I couldn't believe it when I heard the news. He claimed he didn't pull the trigger and that he never had any intentions of killing her. And I want to believe that given how I knew him, but I wouldn't put money on his innocence. Next story. In high school, I was in chem class with this one guy. He was pretty quiet, mostly kept to himself, but always seemed a little off. He once tried to start a fight with a guy who joined the reserves and was like a foot taller and 50 pounds heavier. Other than that, he was never in really any trouble. Then, the year after we graduated, I saw him on the news because he'd left the country and made his way to Syria to join ISIS, where he burned his passport and made a propaganda video talking about all the people he was going to kill. Absolutely blew my mind when I saw it. He saw combat and was confirmed dead there a couple of years ago now. Okay, so I've recorded for Undersparked and Really Sparked for years at this point, and I have to say, I think this is a first. I don't always get these, having done these videos for so long, but I can say, even after having done so many murderer-type videos, that I don't think I've ever had one where somebody joins ISIS. Good grief! Well, I got a first today, so there's that, but that's horrible. Anyway, next story. So, I had a buddy I hung out with in high school. We used to go exploring around the Boulder area and find old mines, etc. He started to get a little off, and I was getting weirded out by the way he was acting, so pretty much called it quits and stopped hanging out with him. Then, one day, out of the blue, he shows up at my grandparents' place looking for me. Said he wanted to catch up. I wasn't there that day, and I think that saved my life. Turns out he had moved into an apartment downtown with a guy as a roommate, and he didn't realize the guy was gay. New roommate made a pass at him, and he wigged out. A few weeks later, a couple of backcountry hikers find the gay guy's body in one of the mines that we had found. His head was smashed in with a rock and was sodomized after death. I think he was there looking for me because I could verify he knew of the mine's location. Next story. I knew of a girl throughout high school. We never spoke very much, but had mutual friends. She seemed a little shy, but normal for an emo girl. Our mutual friend seemed to like her, and I never heard anything bad about her. She was smart, we were all in advanced classes, and she was always super nice to everyone. Then, in 2016, I become friends with this guy, and we hung out a lot. Turns out he dated this girl for several years. One morning he called me and told me to meet him at a church down the road from my house, which is kind of strange because he never seemed to be the type to go to church. And when I got there, he got in my car and told me he found his son, that he had no idea existed, in a duffel bag. in his mom's closet. Apparently, when they broke up, he just happened to keep some of her bags by accident. She messaged him asking him to give them back, and he figured he'd take a peek. Turns out, she was pregnant in 2014, and no one knew about it. She carried the child to term, gave birth, then drowned it in a bathtub. It laid in multiple plastic bags and ultimately in a duffel bag for 2 years until he found it that day. She got 14 years for it. Next story. I was friends with someone who murdered our drug dealer. He was kind of nice, did a lot of coke and heroin, so you could never really get a read on him aside from the fact that he was kind of sketchy. We were only friends because we both bought stuff from the same dealer. He was never really violent or threatening, but we lived in kind of an upper-class suburban area where he would say stuff like gang crap and just overall wanted to act hard. Then one night when he was 16, he went to the dealer's house to buy a few ounces of pot or whatever with his weird Russian friend, and I don't know why, but he ended up shooting and killing him with his friend's gun. I can only imagine that he was coked up and was trying to rob the guy and it went wrong. It was honestly really sad. The dealer was a super great guy and everyone loved him. He had a girlfriend and was in his early 20s, I think. Maybe a sketchball, but had his whole life ahead of him. Died on his front lawn at the hands of some suburban wannabe gang-type dudes. This was in August of 2017. The shooter is doing life, and apparently his Instagram bio says the address of the prison so people can write him. And it says, "Still flexing on him, holla at me." Next story. When I was 15, a close girlfriend of mine started dating an older guy, 18, that was friends with her older siblings. No one knew they were seeing each other, so he would always try to convince her to sneak out at night to meet him. She never did though because she had an abusive dad and knew the trouble she'd get into if she were caught. Flash forward about 2 to 3 weeks in, and there was a Battle of the Band show at her and I's high school. He's supposed to meet us there, and is 2 hours late, almost missing the whole thing. Seemed his normal self though, and the night went on. Then, a week later, I walked onto campus one morning to her bawling her eyes out, saying he'd murdered a girl. Him and 2 other guys, aged 16 and 14, took a 16-year-old girl from another nearby school for a walk, where they beat her to death and SA'd her after the fact. They left her there, and a man walking his dog found her 2 days later. I always remember thinking that could have easily been my friend, and that he hung out with all of us immediately afterwards like nothing. He wasn't a close friend in any way, but man, was not expecting that. Edit. Looked this up to add a link and found out that the youngest kid in this was killed last year in a nearby park. Random homeless shooting. Karma, man. Next story. Friend I had since age 12 didn't have the best family atmosphere growing up. Mother was a barmaid and father worked the late shift. They had some terrible fights. So we always hung at his house after school. We grew up and apart. He fell into the drug scene. I started a family. Fast forward 20 years later, he got caught snitching on a dealer and moved a few hundred miles away to avoid repercussions, but we stayed in touch. He'd call and say he was getting clean and that he had met a girl. A few months later, she was pregnant and wanted me to be the godfather. Thought he was getting his crap together until my mother called me one morning to tell me to read the front page of the paper. He was wanted for murder. After a 3-day run, the story I got from close sources was he had been dating the police chief's daughter. They were both junkies. The parents had gone on vacation and asked the daughter to house sit. She invited him over, they did the junk, and she fell asleep after they had an argument. He sat on the bed stewing and finally walked up next to her while sleeping, brushed her hair out of her face with a .357 5-shot revolver, he was always into guns, smacked her in the head with it enough to wake her up and asked, "How'd it feel to be dead, B-word?" And after he shot her in the face, the dog came in and he shot it also. Then he stole the parents' Jeep and wrecked it while trying to make a run for it. Task force caught him 3 days later back in the childhood neighborhood. He got 33 years, 30 for her and 3 for the dog. He wrote me a couple of times, but I just threw the letters away. No amount of apologies will change my view of someone like that. He died a few years ago in his cell, I heard. Don't really know the circumstances. We were BFFs from 12 to 30-something, but the guy I knew died when that junk took over his life. Next story. I worked with Sarah Kolb, who murdered Adrienne Reynolds in 2005. I was 18, finishing my senior year of high school in Moline, Illinois. Sarah went to the alternative school, which was a completely different building, but we worked at the same job. Cinemark 18 movie theater in Davenport, Iowa. We talked every so often, and she was creepy as hell. One of those overboard goth chicks who blamed everyone else for her problems. She was normal to talk to then. After like 10 minutes though, you'd get the feeling that something was wrong with her. After the murder in a Taco Bell parking lot about 2 blocks from our high school, she came into work a few days later saying they were investigating her for the murder. And I told her something to the effect of, "If you didn't do it, then you don't have to worry." And I shared my nachos with her because I felt bad for her. She had enough problems without this. Well, surprise, her and Corey, he was definitely a piece of crap, murdered Adrienne and tried to cremate the body in her mom's oven after dismembering it. Effing stupid as hell. The police and FBI interviewed me about it, but I never went on the stand during the trial for obvious reasons. There's a little redneck town about 25 miles away called Reynolds, Illinois, where her aunt lives and owned a flower shop. The town was a real crap hole that didn't even have a gas station last time I was there. Anyways, they ran her out of town, forcing her to close her store after Sarah was found guilty. Got pretty messy from what I heard. Lots of vandalism and small town bullcrap. But yeah, Sarah was effing weird. Not like I'm gonna hurt you weird, but like socially awkward, in a really crappy home life and a crappy circle of friends. Well, folks, that is all the murders for today because apparently we have an influx of those videos as of late, but hopefully you enjoyed it. It's just insane to me because like so many of the people in this video said, they seemed normal, they seemed fine, they seem harmless, but it doesn't take a lot for some people to just snap. 2, 3, 4, 5 different life decisions and you're down a completely different path. You never really know who you're talking to, so always be careful, folks. But anyway, that is the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching. I love your face. Have a great day, and bye-bye!